to talk about my hat, Jezebel. It's more of a religious, rebellious statement that I'm making because I have, well, you know what? I'm just going to explain it with the topic that I'm talking about right now, and it will probably make sense at the end of my story and topic that I'm talking about, and you'll understand why I have a hat that says Jezebel. But I wanted to talk about how me being a Christian and doing everything the right way landed me in a situation where I was controlled and manipulated and sexually coerced in my long marriage. So, and I'm actually writing a book right now. It's a memoir. It's about my life. Well, the chapter is basically called The Stepford Wife Porn Star, and it basically explains uh, my whole sexual story of my marriage and how he manipulated me in the sexual bedroom. The Stepford Wife, I call it the Stepford Wife cult because there's a movie called the Stepford Wife Club or something, and they originally made one in the 80s, and then they made a more current one with Nicole Kidman, where they go to this little town that is basically for a bunch of insecure men that feel threatened by their wives that are really smart, have really good jobs, really confident, successful women, and they take them to this town and they turn them into like submissive robotic wives that only serve their husband, and they dress like in 50s dresses and go to these classes every day to know how to be a proper wife. And this actually happened in my life. My ex met, like, when I was starting at the end of my marriage, when I was like starting to figure stuff out and realizing everything. A friends of ours that we knew in the beginning of our marriage came back into our lives, and this man completely turned his wife into a Stepford wife with religion. And my ex, or my husband at the time, was like, oh my gosh, this is like what I need to do because my wife is starting to see the truth about our marriage and that I can't like control her anymore. So he really he grabbed onto this guy and was like, yeah, I need, like, he knows what he's doing, because this guy basically completely got his wife to drop all her talents and she was the most talented. She was gorgeous. She was super talented. She could do anything. She could make anything. She basically was amazing. And it's funny because she actually tattooed my butt when I was back when we were friends before, and she tattooed my butt with my husband at the time's name. Like, she could tattoo, she could sew things, she could create things, she could do interior design. And then when we met them later, he had completely used scripture and religion customized for him to completely drop all her stuff and completely serve him. And I remember asking her, like, do you still do all the wonderful things that you do? Do you still create and this and that? And she completely had dropped everything that she used to do. And she told me to my face, my job is to serve my husband. Future, she actually ended up divorcing him. And she blamed it on adultery, or they blamed it on adultery, because she's still religious, but she was not, like, I'm sure she just couldn't take it anymore being controlled by this man. And my husband at the time couldn't get me to be a Stepford wife. But in the sexual bedroom, I was a Stepford wife our whole marriage until I got to a point where I hit a wall and I couldn't do it anymore. I'm just gonna tell the story of my life and how it led into being a Stepford wife, porn star. I grew up Christian. I did all the I did all the Christian things. I saved myself for marriage. My husband was the first man that I did anything with. I didn't even masturbate. I didn't do anything. I was very shut down sexually and I followed the rules. And then when I met my husband, I was perfect for him because I was completely untouched. I was completely following the rules of religion. And he even like I when I look back at it now, I was I think he purposely tried to like lure me to have sex with him before we got married just to make sure that I was going to be his perfect sex slave cuz he would invite me over to his house and like always have wine and we'd be alone in his house, and at that time I was like, no, I'm not going to have sex before I get married. That's not how I am. So then after we had sex, he tried. I remember the first time we had sex, I was buzzed off of wine, and I remember him just kind of like laying there in a way where I couldn't say you're the one who did it, so like, it's right there and somehow we're naked and I'm the one who stuck it in. I'm the one who broke the rules and had sex before I got married. And I remember I felt so guilty for doing it because I was raised to save myself and I didn't do that. And I was told all these things like they're not going to have respect for you, and there was so much shame around it also. And talking about sexual shame, I feel like religion causes so much sexual shame, and it did for me. Back to the topic. So, I was a good Christian girl, followed the rules, and I was going to wait till I got married to have sex. I had zero sexual experience. When I got married, the whole entire marriage was terrible, like with sex, and but I had no idea because I had no sexual experience before that. So I feel like I did everything right and then I got gypped. And I was, a Stepford wife porn star for 15 years. Sex was fine in the beginning because it was all new to me. I had no idea how it was supposed to be. When we first got married, or even before we got married, I always was like, he's such a gentleman. He's such a godly man, because he wouldn't kiss me or do anything. Actually, he did do stuff to me before we got married, but I always wanted him to like kiss me, and he never would. And I thought he was just waiting till we got married, and then I realized later he never wanted to kiss me. He was never like passionate. He never like showed any desire for me. It was just, like it was just like stimulation. And but at first, the first couple years of marriage, it was just, I had no idea that our sex was bad. And then I started to feel like I was being molested when we were having sex. And I would tell him, and I thought that he would be understanding to that. But he started to show irritation. And then as time went on, he started to tell me that he waited for he started to get irritated with me when I would tell him, like, I don't like it when you do that to me. I don't like it when you do that. Like my favorite part was actually actual sex. Um, but somehow it was never that way. It was always a bunch of other stuff. Like, I'm trying not to be too graphic, but it was basically like most of our sex was always a certain way. It was like certain things, like oral stuff. It was never like touching each other, both engaging together. It was like, that's why I would say it just felt like I was filming a porno. It wasn't like the movies where people desire each other and they're just like both engaging and touching each other and kissing. It was like, okay, now you do this to me, and I just lay there, and now I do this to you, but it wasn't actual like insertion. And I always wanted that because I felt like I could engage with him that way. But it was never really satisfying. It would only last, it would always be at the end. It would have to be all this other stuff and then actual sex. So when I started to tell him, like, I really don't like, these specific things, which basically was me just laying down and him doing stuff to me. It was never like both of us engaging with each other. And it would make me feel like I was being molested when I would just lay there and he would do stuff to me. And he always insisted that we did that. And then he would make me feel guilty when I would complain about not doing those things. He would make me feel guilty for so-called restricting him from certain sexual acts, even though at the end of our marriage, I had a light bulb moment and I realized there was only through like a few things that bothered me that made me feel like I was being molested that he wanted to do. And it was only those things that he wanted to do. And I realized in the end, fast forwarding to the end, I realized that the reason I also got triggered and felt like I was being molested is because I was like being like the victim when I was a little kid, where I just had to lay there and let him do stuff to me. That's how I was molested. I was just laying there getting stuff done to me. It wasn't a engagement of two people both interacting. And that's why I liked sex more than all the other stuff, and I could never get him to do the other stuff. And so after the 2 years of marriage, when I started to feel like I was being molested, he had a little bit of grace at first, but he started to get frustrated and started to guilt me and tell me, and that's when he started to pull out the Bible scriptures and be like, your body's mine. I feel like I'm being gypped because I'm, I waited till I was married to you to have sex, and we're supposed to give each other all of our, both give each other ourselves to each other, and you're restricting me from doing things. And there were other things that actually came out in therapy later that really bothered me, but he insisted on doing them. He wanted to do anal stuff, and I had zero interest. And the part that makes it wrong is that he pushed it so much that it frustrated me because it made me feel inadequate. Like, you keep pushing this when I keep telling you I don't want to do that. And so it got to the point where I was like, I blew up one time and I was like, what if you want this so bad, you should have told me this before we got married, that this was a deal breaker for you, because you seem to care about it so much. And I remember he went silent on me, and he made me feel even more guilty for saying that to him, even though he's the one who continued to push something on me and try to manipulate me into doing it. And at one point, I almost did, because he just kept pushing it so much. And then yeah, it was awful, and I hated it. And I remember telling my therapist, like, why? Like, I felt so guilty, like I owed him this thing that he wanted to do so much, because he pushed so hard on it. And near the end, when I was telling my therapist this, she told me I did not have to do that. And because it was so ingrained in me from his pushing, and the Bible scriptures, like, your body's mine, and, I feel gypped, and all this guilt that he put on me for that, my therapist told me, and she was a Christian therapist, so that also made it hard for me to believe that she was telling me this, like, that she wasn't telling me the truth. It was hard for me to believe her, because she said, you don't ever have to do anything you don't want to do in the sexual bedroom, ever. He doesn't care about my boundaries. And he even took it so far as one time by saying, well, let me go around the surface, go around the edge. And I said, okay, fine, but you can't go in. And then when I reached an orgasm, he would stick his finger in, cross my boundary, because he knew that while I'm orgasming, I'm not gonna make him stop. And to me, that was like the worst. Like, it's like, how can you do that to somebody? Like, you have zero respect for the boundary they put up, and then you wait for me to orgasm, and that's when you stick your finger in. So embarrassing. Like, I got interrupted again, and it was right when I was talking about when the boundary crossed of finger slipping into the butthole during orgasm. So, to continue on, I was always trying to figure out how to make our sex better. And I realized one day that the reason I didn't like it was because I realized the whole porno thing. Like, when somebody is watching porn, they are not connecting with the person on the screen. There's zero connection. It's fully stimulation. They're watching something that is turning them on, but there is no connection with that person. So I had like this moment after my search for, like, why is our sex so bad, on top of the guilt and everything else. He is not engaging with me. It's all about stimulation, and there's no desire or passion. It's like, and I used to tell him too, it just feels like we're filming a porno. Um, and I would ask him to kiss me sometimes, and then I remember when I asked him to kiss me, he almost would be irritated that I asked him that, like he didn't want to, and he would just stick his tongue in my mouth roughly and swirl it around, and then take it out, and, like, it was like, there, it was his energy was like, there, I gave you what you wanted, so can we be done with that and get back to stimulation? And I remember being really disappointed, because it wasn't intimate at all. And it made me realize that in the beginning of our marriage, that was why he never kissed me, is because he didn't never wanted to kiss me. He was, like, emotionally disconnected, so he couldn't, like, actually connect with me. So that accentuated the whole, like, porno thing. So then I realized, like, okay, so we're just, like, filming a porno all the time. And I would look in his eyes when we were having sex. I'm like, and I would try to connect with him by me using my mind power, like by desiring him and touching him and like. But I remember when I had that realization, I would look at him and I would see him being frustrated because he couldn't get hard or couldn't stay hard unless there was a bunch of stimulation. And I could see in his eyes that he was searching for stimulation. He wouldn't look in my eyes. He didn't touch me like he desired me. He never kissed me. And even when we were having sex, he was just searching for that stimulation of what turned him on, which was usually my butt. He was a butt guy, and it's like I had to position myself in the right way. I had to arch, I had to like make myself sexually appealing like a porno. Otherwise, he couldn't keep a boner. That huge realization happened for me. And I remember near the end, I was like, I, I'd try to like explain things to him. And I was like, and he'd be like, what do you want me to do? And I'm like, well, I want you to have passion for me and desire. And I just remember having like a blank face and being like, oh, I don't, like he didn't know. He wanted a step by step guide, and then he would later make fun of me. Like we were divorced and everything was over. I realized like he just he couldn't do that because he's emotionally disconnected, and it was never about connecting with me. So that's why everything was based around stimulation. I remember one time I wrote in my journal, I had a dream about the man who molested me, and I remember hiding under the table, hearing this like scary dad of my friend walking around the house, and I was like hiding. I felt safe because I was hidden under the table, and then he was like yelling at everybody in the house, and I remember he came and sat next to the table I was hiding under. And then he started to talk to me quietly, like, this is our secret. You don't worry, I won't reveal your hiding spot, and I'm safe for you. I'm vulnerable to you. And then when I started to feel safe, he just slipped his hand down my shirt. And then I woke up as an I, I turned into an adult and grabbed his hand and pulled it away. And that dream to me was very symbolic. Like, the molester is going to make you feel like you're safe with them, and then they're going to violate you and cross your boundary. And I remember writing this in my journal, and somehow I realized that my ex had been reading all my journals. When they know everything about you, and they can watch everything you do, and they know, then they can better control you. And I remember him telling me, "Oh, I happened to land open to this spot on your journal. It just opened and it was there." And I'm like, "No." But he tried to convince me that that dream had to do with the man who molested me. And I realized much later, no, that dream was about him. Like, he was almost like like a repeat of my molester from when I was a little girl, because he insisted on continuing to do the very thing that made me feel molested our whole entire marriage. Every time we had sex, he would convince me that he needed to give me an orgasm, and that meant me laying down and just having things done to me. And then I would feel obligated to do something back to him because he knew that that's how I was. When people do nice things to me, my self-worth is so low that I feel obligated to do something back for them. And that is, for me, was something about self-worth. Like, I hated when anybody was nice to me because then I owed them. And that was really ingrained in me the whole time we were married. He would only do nice things all the time, because he knew that I would feel obligated to give to him. And so a lot of it was always centered around sex. It was like he would always do nice things or butter me up because he needed me to be in the sexual bedroom with him every single night. And I started to dread it. I hated it. Um, and I couldn't figure out how to get him to give me what I wanted, the kind of sex I wanted, when all I wanted was to be intimate with him. I wanted to kiss him. I wanted him to desire me. And with that dream that I had, I remember that happened, played out in real life, which I felt like was like an indicator of that dream was basically talking about him. Because one day in real life, because sex had become such an expected thing, and I knew he wanted it like every day if he could, and I would just start coming up with ways to get away with not having sex. And I even knew when he was on the prowl for it. And a lot of times he'd be, when the kids were not around for some reason, or when they went to bed. And I remember there was this one time where it was like the kids were gone or something, and I knew he was going to come and expect sex from me. I remember being like, I'm going to hide. I was like the little girl in the dream. I'm an adult ass woman, and I hid in my closet, and I put our stroller in front of me, and like I hid behind all the clothes. And like clockwork, he came to the house, and I heard him walking back and forth, and I watched his feet, and I could sense his like irritation in his energy. Like, where is she? Like, I want to have, do the, I need my sex binky. Where is she? And I just watched, and I felt so safe. I'm like, oh my God, he's like, I hope he doesn't find me. He found me. He found me under the closet, and he was very confused and upset that I was hiding from him. Um, and I don't remember, but I'm sure I ended up, you know, doing stuff with him. But it came to a point near the end of my marriage where I just hit a wall. Like, I couldn't do it anymore. I just, normally the guilt and the expectation would be so heavy on me that I would just give in and just get it over with. My body just hit a wall, and I couldn't. And there were other times too where all the things I tried to do to figure out what was wrong with our sex, I nothing worked. And I remember at some point I started to drink, because when I was drunk, it didn't bother me as much, and I felt like, oh, I can give him what he wants. And I remember I got so drunk one time, and then the next day I felt so shitty, and I was so upset that it had gotten to this point where I had to get drunk to get through sex. And I remember his face was just lit up. I thought the next day he would be like, okay, you had the kind of sex you wanted to have, basically, where I was acting like I enjoyed it because I was drunk, and even though I blacked out, um, and you could do whatever you wanted. Um, I thought the next day it would give me a few days of a break, but no. All it did was make him want it even more. And I remember him making a joke, when are we going to do that again? How fucked up that was, that he didn't care that I was drunk and I felt like shit the next day. All he cared about was getting back to that type of sex that he wanted. So that didn't work anymore. And even when I wanted a separation, I thought, oh, this is going to be awesome. I am going to have a break from sex. And I was like, it's obvious. You don't have to have sex when you're separated. But he flipped out and he tried to convince me that it doesn't mean we can't have sex just because we're separated. And then he would insist on me sleeping in the bed with him. And then he would try to cuddle with me. And I'd be like, I want a separation. Like, that means no sex. That means no cuddling. That means nothing. Sometimes I wonder now that we're divorced. We've been divorced for like 6 years. I'm like, I wonder what he does about his, sex, because he got so even more religious when I divorced him, because he used religion to also make it look like that's the reason we got divorced, because I'm not a Christian anymore and I broke up the marriage, and that's what he used. And he got super culty and Christiany when we got divorced. I'm like, I'm sure he thinks that masturbation and porn and all that is not, like, I wonder if he does it behind closed doors, because he acted like sexual stimulation was something he had to do on a daily. And he's just like a shutdown, like it's just another addiction for him. So sometimes I wonder, what do you do about that now? You don't have a sex binky anymore, so what do you do about it now? I think that's all I'm going to talk about right now. So the reason why I wear a Jezebel hat is not because I am a Jezebel. It's because it's my rebel way of saying, like, the whole conditioning of religion and sex, shame, and all that stuff is so fucked up. And I actually did the whole Christian thing. Waited till I got married to have sex. And then because I was so inexperienced and I had no idea, I was sexually coerced, manipulated, and guilted, and didn't have good connected soul connecting sex, wasn't desired, wasn't cherished my whole entire marriage, and especially in the sexual bedroom. I was basically filming a porn with my husband, and I was basically his other stimulant on top of the other stimulants he had. And then I find out when, like, when I got divorced, like, all the shame and control that was used on me. And even though I did things the way I thought I was supposed to. So this is kind of like me saying, fuck you, yes. You want to call me a Jezebel? Go ahead, because I would rather be a Jezebel than be controlled and manipulated by you and be your sex binky for the rest of my life. And it's just like, because it makes me so angry. The sexual abuse was hidden and was real. And like, it's so crazy how much he conditioned me to feel guilty about not having sex the way I wanted to, and he could never do that with me. And I was basically like a Stepford wife porn star. Conditioned me so much that when my therapist told me how wrong it was, and I don't have to do anything that I don't want to do, and I'm like, all that guilt that I had for not fulfilling my husband, and him making me think that I was a problem because I was shut down from being molested and I wasn't giving him my whole body like I was supposed to, like in the Bible says, when really it was, no, you can't desire me and emotionally connect with me and have passionate connected sex with me because you are shut down, but you're going to twist that all and make me look like the problem in the sexual bedroom so that you can just keep treating me as a sexual binky because of your problems. Anyways, I'm going to be done right now. But hope that helps anybody else in a situation like mine. You do not owe anybody anything. You don't have to do anything that you don't want to do. And only have sex with somebody who deserves to have sex with you and who connects with you, who desires you and cherishes you. The funny thing is like, I'm not a Jezebel. Now I'm at the point where I'm waiting for a soul connection with somebody, and I'm not just gonna have sex with somebody and it just be physical or just be like a porno. Like, I'm waiting for that soul connection with somebody. And I did go through a hoe phase, and that's because I it's the first person that I ended up hooking up with kissed me, touched me. It wasn't like lay down, let me do things to you, or it wasn't just about stimulation. They actually engaged with me. And even though, like, we didn't have like an emotional connection, it was still even better than the man I was with for 16 years. And it just blew my mind that sex could be better with somebody who actually goes, oh, like, I'm attracted to your body. Oh, I want to kiss you. Oh, I want to have passion with you. And I discovered all that through going through a hoe phase and realizing how bad he was at having sex, how disconnected he was, and how even hookups were better than the type of sex I had with my own husband. For listening, everyone, and don't settle. Don't be a sex binky to anyone.